My name is Dan. This happened 3 years ago. I moved out of my parents' house once I started making a steady paycheck. I'm a plumber, and one day I had to go to someone's house to fix some pipes. There was a married couple and their daughter living there. Their daughter was 22 at the time. She was 6 months older than me, and her name was Amanda. While I was working, she was talking to me, asking if I was single and stuff like that. And to be honest, she seemed pretty cute. We exchanged phone numbers and eventually started dating, and she even moved into my house. We were 3 months into our relationship, and stuff started to get out of hand. She was always getting mad and annoyed so easily. She always started arguments, and so on. This began to happen all of the time, even in public, which was incredibly embarrassing. One day I had enough, and I had to break up with her, and I told her to leave and never come back. Amanda was pretty pissed off when I said that. I just ignored her when she was packing her stuff. She finally left, or so I thought. After that day, she would always show up at my house, harass me, throw rocks at my window, and so on. I'd called the cops many times, but she was gone by the time they showed up. About a month later, when I came home from working, I would find her in her house, yelling at me to come back, or I'd find writing on my walls that would say, "Come back, or I'll kill you." The writing eventually went from pencil to marker, and then her own fucking blood. And Jess, I'm being serious when I said blood. That bitch carved my name a bunch of times into her arms and legs. She only got into my house because I forgot to take the house key back from her at the time. In hindsight, I'm such an idiot, I know. That psycho knew where my parents lived and showed up to their house during the night. My mom almost had a heart attack when she woke up to the sound of a knife being tapped on the window glass. When she woke up, she saw Amanda standing there, staring at her while psychotically smiling at her. Amanda did a lot, which really pissed me off, so one night, I decided to stay overnight at my parents' house. It was about 2 in the morning when I heard a tapping noise in the window next to me. I turned and saw Amanda staring right at me. Her eyes were wide open and red. She had bags under her eyes and a huge smile. I went outside and started yelling at her to stay away from me and my family, but she screamed at the top of her lungs and charged at me with a knife. I punched her right in the face, which knocked her out. I called the cops and made sure Amanda didn't wake up while they were arriving. The cops came quickly while Amanda was knocked out. They found my house key on her, and she was arrested and eventually sentenced for a long while. After Amanda was sentenced, my parents and I moved out of state because we'd like to stay as far away from Amanda as we possibly can, because she will eventually be released.
This happened to me at the beginning of this year, just after I lost my husband to meningitis. I had moved in with my father and taken a job at a local hotel. It was a nice, cushy job that wasn't very stressful, and it was also nice to me in my grief-stricken state. The job was the night shift front desk manager position. So I was watching scary movies or listening to creepy podcasts that seemed to help keep me awake. My husband had never liked scary things like I did, so it was nice getting back to something that was mine. Being the night worker, I was always by myself during my shift. The hotel was new, so it wasn't creepy to be by myself, especially since there was always someone around as far as guests went, and on top of that, my boss was always a phone call away. I knew I'd have backup if needed. Anyway, it was a night like any other. I was in the back office behind the desk, watching the cameras and listening to a podcast while twirling a pen around, waiting for hours to tick away. The hotel was pretty empty, so I felt more alone than usual. I looked down at my phone as my podcast ended and went to pick another one when I noticed movement outside the building on the cameras. A guest was walking in. I hadn't seen a car pull in from the driveway camera, but I chalked it up to me just not paying attention and went to the desk. The man walked in and I quickly noticed his clothes were dirty, tattered, and that he had this odd smell to him. Metallic smelling. I shook off the weird feeling and looked up at his face before greeting him. And I noticed that his eyes weren't on me, but the wall behind, just above me. I followed his gaze, wondering what he could be looking at, but there wasn't anything there. I was confused, but thought maybe he was lost in thought. I greeted him again, but his gaze still remained on the wall. I was starting to get freaked out, but kept my cool and cleared my throat. "Sir, is there something I can help you with?" I asked more firmly. Quickly, his eyes flicked down, and those eyes were wide and crazy looking. It startled me enough that I took a small step back. His previously blank expression grew into that of a crazed, wide smile. He was missing teeth, and the second his lips parted, I could smell his rotten breath. It made my stomach churn. Before I could open my mouth, I watched his eyes slowly creep up and down my body, as if he were undressing me with his eyes. Then his eyes moved to my hand, and his smile faded into a hate-filled glare. His eyes were on my wedding ring. Well, yes, I still wore it, as I wasn't ready to give it up yet. "What the heck is that?" he asked, his voice thick and gruff and full of anger. "My wedding ring, sir. I'm married," I said, thinking maybe he was drunk. His glare got worse as his eyes met mine again. "Married? You lying bitch! You never told me you were married! You lied to me!" "Sir, I don't know what you're talking about, and I'm afraid that I'm going to have to ask you to leave." I was so scared at that moment, but tried desperately not to cry. He was still shouting at me. "So, you're kicking me out of my own home? You're a little hussy. I'm taking what's owed to me. Get over here!" He reached across the counter to try and grab me, and I let out a scream, stumbled back, tripping over my long skirt. I crawled quickly for the office door as he rushed to the counter. He grabbed my shirt, tearing it down the back as I went to slam the door shut, and I slammed it on his hand, making him scream in pain as I heard the bones break. As he let me go, I managed to finally shut and lock it before going into my boss's office. And as I dialed 911, I could hear him screaming at the office door, kicking as hard as he could to get it open. The operator stayed on the phone with me until the cops arrived. It took 3 grown officers and a taser gun to take him down and get him in the car. When everything was safe, I was sat down for a statement, and my boss and father were called. As my father was getting me into his truck, I heard an officer say that the man was a highly wanted man from Florida who had escaped a psychiatric facility. After he escaped the facility, he went looking for young brunette girls who were heavyset like me, or rather like his late wife. He had killed her and cut out her eyes and breasts, and done the same to 2 other girls in Alabama, so I could only guess he planned to do the same to me. Thank God for strong deadbolts and all of the police officers.
I used to work at a call center company, and my shift started at 11 p.m. Since training, I'd heard a lot of ghost stories about our building. Of course, I didn't believe them, and I really wouldn't have cared anyway because all I cared about was work. One night, I went on a short break to go to the comfort room. Our office is located at the left corner of the building, and usually it's quite dark compared to the other office corners. I normally use the comfort room in the middle of our building because it's bigger and a lot of people go there. But since it was just a short break, I chose to use the executive's comfort room because it was much closer. Besides, it was always clean and looked a lot nicer compared to the other ones. When you enter the comfort room, the first thing you see on your right side are 2 sinks, a large mirror, and 2 lights above them. Then there are 3 cubicles on the right side and 2 cubicles on the left side of the room. When I entered, I noticed that the room was a little bit darker than usual. Some of the lights were not on, and only the cubicle in the corner on the right side had paper left, so I entered that one. When I was sitting on the toilet, I heard someone come in and enter the cubicle next to mine. And then I heard a woman crying. I tried to ask if she was okay, but she just kept crying. As I finished my business and stood up, the crying suddenly stopped. Concerned, I stood outside the door of the middle cubicle, knocked slightly and asked again if she was okay, but there was still no answer. I tried peeking under the cubicle door, but no one was in there. But I could have sworn I heard someone come in earlier. I felt a bit spooked as I remembered the ghost stories that my coworkers used to tell about our building. I started walking fast to the exit, but somehow the doorknob that was fine when I'd entered was now broken, and I couldn't get the door to open. I was getting actually scared. The crying began again. I started banging on the door and shaking the doorknob. There was no use. And then the sound of the woman crying started getting closer. Panicking, I also started crying while banging desperately on the door. The crying stopped. I could feel the woman standing right behind me. One of the lights in the ceiling started flickering, and the door still wouldn't open. I tried to avoid looking back in fear of what I might see, but from the corner of my eye, I saw in the mirror a reflection of a woman in the flickering light. She wasn't standing at my back, but half of her face was visible in one of the cubicle doorways. I closed my eyes. I was soaked in cold sweat. I remember shaking from fear, thinking I was going to die. I started praying as I cried. Only a minute or two, though it felt much longer, passed before the door suddenly opened and a maintenance lady stepped in. I was so relieved. I told her about what had happened, but she just apologized for the broken doorknob and ignored everything I said about the crying woman. I went straight to the office and apologized to my supervisor for coming back late from my break. I tried to tell her about what happened and told her that I was not feeling well, that I didn't think I could finish my shift that night. She didn't seem to believe my story. I warned my coworkers as well and told them about my scary toilet trip. I never went back to that comfort room ever again, and eventually left my job a few months later.
It was in 6th grade in junior high school. I remember this one specific day when there was a thunderstorm. I was heading to gym, where the gym teacher greets each student outside of the girls' locker room as usual. I went inside the locker room. I was getting ready to change into my gym clothes as usual, and I noticed at the corner of my eye, a shadow was walking past at the other side of the lockers. I looked and said, "Is anybody here?" There was no answer, so I took my gym clothes with me and thought stupidly that I should follow where the shadow was heading. I went to the back of the lockers where the shower room was. I opened every curtain from each shower booth except the one in the last. All of a sudden, the light that was illuminating in the back started to blink. I don't know where my courage came from, but I decided to open the last curtain in the back. And when I did, there was nothing. I turned around, but then I heard someone crying in the shower booth. So I opened the other curtain again quickly, but still, there was nothing. It was rather strange to me because at that moment I felt cold. I heard in the distance talking, and it was a few girls walking past. I asked them if they saw anyone who was crying, but they said no. It was literally weird. When all the students arrived, the gym teacher asked one of the girls to open the gym doors. Usually, I'm the one that opens the gym doors, but she decided to let someone else have the turn. We were waiting for her, and then we heard a loud, sharp scream. Shortly, that girl ran into the locker room and cried. We were all confused, and she told us that she saw something, a baby, covered in blood. I went to the gym. The keys were on the floor. The gym door was opened, and I tried to turn on the lights, but they were completely off. I wasn't sure, but thought maybe, somehow it was due to the thunderstorm. I couldn't see anything because it was too dark, and when I stepped inside the gym, I heard crying. It was a baby crying, and it was coming from the stage. I was frozen. but I wanted to check what was going on here. I went closer to the stage, but the crying abruptly stopped and was followed by a crack noise. Then I heard crying from another girl. She was sobbing. All of a sudden, the lights were on. My teacher grabbed me and asked if I was okay. I told her that I heard something but didn't see anything. She looked at me calmly and said, "I know what you're talking about. You're lucky that you didn't see anything." Then she said when she was working late one day, she saw a body floating in the swimming pool, which is close to the gym. She thought it was one of the students, so she tried to save that person. When I tried to get to her, it was completely gone, she said. And then she told me there was the ghost of the girl who drowned a few years back. This girl was pregnant and she gave birth in the shower booth. She didn't want it, so she killed the baby by breaking its neck. Later on, she regretted what she did, so she drowned herself in the swimming pool. When I heard the whole story from my teacher, I felt a little bit sad. After that, I didn't see or hear anything, but I'm still wondering what was the shadow I saw in the locker room. And sometimes it still gives me goosebumps when I think about it, especially the crying of the baby and the bone cracking noise. If the gym teacher did not come along, would I have seen that ghost of a girl holding the baby? Well, other than that, I just feel grateful that I didn't see anything that would shock me for my whole life.
So before getting into the story itself, I want to give some backstory on something that happened when I was around the age of 9. I grew up in a village called Hotlax in the northern parts of Sweden. The road leading from my school to my home was a long one, where the local authorities had to put up lamps which emitted a very dim blue light. I always felt like a nervous wreck when I had to walk to and from my school, both because, even with the lamps, the road was very dark, and also because I was bullied, so the bullies could have waited in the woods right next to the road. It was one event that I remembered vividly during the winter of 1999. I'd slept poorly the night before and the math lesson had been killing me, so I barely felt awake when I was beginning to walk home. The lamps were off, which isn't really so weird, as the sensors for the lamps were pretty low, so any kid could have taken a flashlight, put it towards the sensors, and after a few seconds, the lamps would shut down for a few minutes. Since I was so tired, I'd closed my eyes when I started walking. But after walking about 20 meters on this road, I opened my eyes and noticed that the lamps were off, and I stopped. I was getting nervous. I was reasoning with myself and decided to push on. I was 10, and in my youthful arrogance, I thought I had reached the age where my balls should have been as hard as Duke Nukem's. Hotlax is a very quiet village, so I was barely hearing anything except the wind when this happened. To the left of the road is a very thick forest, and suddenly I could just hear this loud scream coming from it. It was very similar to the male scream you can hear in movies when someone's in huge pain. With the speed of Usain Bolt, I ran as fast as I could towards my home without looking back. Now we're jumping to late autumn 2011. My parents were on a trip to the Canary Islands and asked me to move into their house just for the week so I could take care of the dog. The thought of spending a whole week in my old room, listening to my old Mayhem CDs and eating pizza were just too good to be true. I always walked with my dog outside during midnight, because then I didn't have to take him outside again until the late morning hours. This time was no different, except I decided to walk a bit longer. I decided to walk along Oxelvägen and then follow Innimarksvägen towards Norra Hotlaxvägen. There are no lamps on the most parts of Innimarksvägen, so after leaving Oxelvägen, I stopped. I lit a cigar and told my dog to stay close to me. While walking along the road, I was just enjoying the fresh air and listening to the sound of leaves rustling in the trees. There's a pretty big area next to the road where they have chopped down a lot of trees. When I came to that area, my dog stopped and started barking towards the area I described. When I looked towards the area, I could see the silhouette of a person. The only visible parts were the hands. I said, "What the hell," with a pretty loud voice. The person turned around towards me. If I didn't know any better, I could have sworn that only the head and hands turned, as I didn't see any movements at all on the rest of the body. A white mask. The guy was wearing a white mask with a slit for each of his eyes. My dog started whimpering. The guy raised his right hand, with all of his fingers pointing towards me, and he screamed. It sounded like the exact same scream I had heard as a kid walking home from school that afternoon. What must have been survival instincts, I just started running. When I had ran for 20 meters or so, I stopped to see if my dog was still with me, which he was, and then looked towards the spot the guy had stood. He wasn't there. He had moved to the spot where I stood, now with his hands down, but the mask still towards me. I started running again until I got to Norra Hotlagsvägen. I'd never been so scared before. When I stopped, I was crying and my whole body was shaking. And then I walked home.
This happened when I was in my junior year of high school. I was picked as a candidate for a beauty contest, but I didn't know how to sing or do something out of the ordinary. So I decided to dance with two of my friends from class. We planned it in class and agreed to rehearse our choreography immediately. There was an empty house in front of my house that had a caretaker. My mom and the caretaker were friends, so I asked her if I could use one of their empty rooms to rehearse our dance. She agreed, but told us that the electricity doesn't work, so it was best to practice during the daytime. The house was pretty big. It was 3 stories tall with a rooftop. However, this house was unfinished. After class, we all gathered in front of the house. It was around 4 p.m. I brought my laptop to play music, and we practiced for a while and finally almost memorized it. Then I suggested that we should record our dance using my laptop's camera to see if we were making any mistakes or weren't synchronized. We were having fun with each other while dancing, and we even took pictures. After that, while taking a break, we played our dance video. It was good at first. However, in the middle of us dancing, there was a woman's awful screaming in the background, like someone was being murdered. The same continuous scream was going on and on while it was recording. It was already getting dark outside, and we were in shock that we couldn't even move our bodies at all. We knew that we were the only ones in the room. And of course, we would have stopped our practice if there was someone else there. And furthermore, we did not remember hearing anyone scream continuously. Shaking my hands with fear, I decided to rewind the video and play it again. The same screaming was in the video, but for some reason, this time her voice was much higher and very sharp. I've never heard that kind of horrific voice in my whole life. We then turned off my laptop, screamed, and ran outside of the house. When we got home, we explained it to my mom, but she thought we were being paranoid at first. But when I played the video, she was creeped out too. Mom didn't say anything but forced me to delete the video. Ever since then, we never rehearse there anymore, And every time I look outside my window, I am scared that I might see the lady behind those screams.
My name is Christian. This happened 3 years ago, and I was living in a dormitory with my best friend, Miko. I was a civil engineering student at that time, and Miko was a pharmacy student. The dormitory where we were staying had 9 rooms overall. Our room was quite small, but enough space for 2 people. The kitchen was at the opposite end of the entrance door, and we had no fire exit. The restroom was just at the left side of the kitchen, and the bed, that we even shared together, was on the right side. And there was a table in the middle where we used to eat, or make it as a study table. Our dormitory had rumors about ghosts in there, but we hadn't encountered any in our 2 years staying. So one day on Friday morning, before going to school, we decided to put a hot cup of coffee in the sink. I know that was such a stupid thing, but we were curious about it. If this became empty when we came back from the school, then this is a haunted dormitory, I told him. Then we left for school, and soon I forgot about the coffee thing because I was quite busy with the calculus examination. After that, when I came back to the dorm, around 7 p.m., I saw Miko was sleeping in his bed. It was quite weird since usually when I come back to the room, he was either playing games or cooking in the kitchen. But it didn't bother me since it was a midterm season and I thought that he might just be exhausted. Suddenly, I remembered the mug of coffee that we put in the sink earlier in the morning. I put my bag on the table and headed straight to the sink. I saw the coffee was still full. So I said, "Told you, there's no ghost." So I poured out the hot coffee and washed the cup. Right after I washed the cup, my phone inside my pocket vibrated. Someone was calling me. I looked at the phone, and it was Miko. I stared at the bed where Miko was still lying and sleeping. I shouted, "Hey man, why are you calling me?" But he didn't respond. So I thought inside my head, did he leave his phone at school? I answered the call. "Hello?" To my shock and disbelief, it was Miko. It was his voice, and he said, "Dude, just eat without me if you're already hungry. I'm still at the mall buying our food supply for next week." I was frozen. I was so confused and terrified at the time until I got the courage to say, "Are you serious?" He said, "Yeah, sorry, but I'm almost done at the counter. I'm just going to drive home now if you can wait. Let's eat together. Bye," and hung up. I was there standing still in the kitchen and couldn't move while still looking at the man in the bed. Then I realized the cup of coffee. We left it in the morning. When I went to the dorm, it was not empty as we expected, but it was still hot. It should have cooled down. I looked back at the sink for 1 second, and to my terror, when I looked again at the bed, he was no longer there. I screamed, ran out of the room, and waited for my best friend. When Miko was finally home after 40 minutes, I told him what happened and saw his confused, scared reaction. After that night, we decided to transfer to another dormitory, and fortunately, nothing happened anymore in the new place. But I will never forget this memory, forever.
Ah! What a pleasant way to begin my 3 a.m. shift at Mercy Hospital. The first thing I did as I sat down was cut my finger. It was a paper cut. And despite working at one of the largest hospitals in the state, I couldn't find a single band-aid laying around. I sucked on my index finger like a vampire while I scrambled my desk for that band-aid. I found one. Purple. I'm a hospital receptionist, and all that means is I greet visitors, make appointments, and look nice. Well, as nice as a 30-year-old man who hasn't slept in hours can look. That night, as we call it, it was just me and a few nurses on the floor. Other than that, it was ghost quiet, except for the heavy rain. I sat back on the cheap recliner chair all receptionists get the honour of using. While adjusting my band-aid, I listened to the television mounted on the corner of the ceiling as it broadcasted a seemingly important message.
Authorities say the woman was last seen on Cedar Avenue.
I looked up to see if the television was showing any images of this strange woman. None. It was yet another crazy person with no name and no face who we were supposed to look out for. Not creepy at all.
Authorities also say the woman was reportedly walking around and asking people very, very bizarre questions.
I focused back on my desk and continued working, but I still listened as the news anchor went on and on. She continued.
The following statement was issued by an unidentified government official.
Listen carefully, folks. Whatever she asks you, answer no. Do not, under any circumstances, answer yes.
Officials won't comment further as to why, citing security clearance. Police are asking that you immediately call 911 if you deem anyone suspicious.
I thought that part of the coverage was quite odd, but I wasn't sure anything could scare me anymore. Working here at the hospital, I thought I had seen it all. At the flash of the ruby red ambulance lights, I've seen people come in with severed arms, legs, fingers, people who somehow managed to scoop out their eyes, failed suicide attempts, and much, much more. You get used to it. My head was practically sunk into my desk as I filled out paperwork. That's when I heard something very subtle, initially. I heard it coming from the front doors, the entrance. The automatic doors opened and closed, slamming against each other, and sounding an obnoxiously loud thud each time. The very dim lighting I had surrounding my desk flickered incessantly. Hello? I called out, seated behind the safety of my desk. Only the whistling wind responded. Hello? I called out again. I felt obligated to check if someone was there, especially since it might have been someone who was injured and needed our attention. I reluctantly picked myself up from my chair and walked over to inspect. I nearly slipped and cracked my head open as the entrance floor was almost flooded from the rain. I noticed footsteps, wet shoe marks that seemed to come inside the hospital and then back out. I stood near the doors, poking my head outside, and looked. All I heard was the distant sounds of sirens and honking cars. The rain poured harder. The peace and quiet was disturbed within moments of me sitting back down. The automatic door started again, opening and closing, slamming shut, and letting in more rain as they did. But this time, I heard gentle footsteps make their way towards me, tapping closer and closer. Someone slowly emerged from the darkness between the entrance and front desk. A woman with drenched black hair approached, wearing a dark brown raincoat and a pair of boots that were too large for her toothpick legs. Her face was inundated with wrinkles and wet makeup. Her black eyeshadow smudged. Despite the heavy rain outside, she didn't seem to have bothered wearing her hoodie. Hello, how can I help you, ma'am? She didn't respond. She looked around, scanning and observing an unimpressive hospital. Is there something I can help you with? Still nothing. We engaged in a brief stare down, which she won. I looked down and pretended to gather important paperwork. Are you here to visit someone? Then finally, she responded, without talking. She simply nodded and then took a few steps forward, her hands hanging down her side. Her posture was unnatural, almost uncomfortable. Okay, for now I need you to sign here, then we'll have to wait a few hours for visiting time to begin, I said, pushing forward a sheet of paper and a pen. She raised her arm to sign and then abruptly stopped. She seemed startled by something on the desk. She looked at me, tilted her head and, with a smile that was as wide as her eyes, said,
"Would you please move that for me?"
I was confused at first, and then she pointed at it with her index finger, as drops of rainwater tapped against my desk while her arm hovered over it. I took the little crucifix we had at the front desk and put it in a drawer. The woman proceeded as if she was going to finally sign the paper and then stop before writing anything. She dropped the pen on the ground and stood there again, staring at me. She asked me a question.
"Do you reject the Trinity?"
"I'm sorry," I replied. For a few more uncomfortable moments, the woman stood there like an ancient statue. I had no idea what she meant by the question. "Ma'am, who exactly are you here to see? Family? Friend? What's your relationship with the patient?" Before I could finish talking midway through my question, the woman turned around and walked out the door, still smiling and her eyes as wide as I'd ever seen on a person. I went back to work and tried to move on, but her creepy mannerisms were trapped in my mind throughout the night. At around 4 AM I spotted one of the children in our hospital walking down the hall. "Nina, is that you?" I called out. All the kids in the hospital knew me. I was proudly considered one of the cooler employees. I let them break the rules. I brought them snacks upstairs and even told them scary stories, despite their predictable regret later on. The nurses would get angry with me every time I held one of my scary story nights. They always had a bunch of bed sheets to change the next morning. I only did these things for the kids when I wasn't busy, when it was a quiet night, and this was one of those uneventful nights, which of course was a good thing. Anyway, it was very odd to see Nina awake at that time, walking down those shadowy halls. She was absolutely terrified of the dark, and yet there she was. "Nina, is that you?" I squinted my eyes as I walked towards her.
"Sorry, Matt.
She began.
I don't want to be there anymore."
She had dragged her blue blanket along with her, which was her way of gesturing to us that she wanted to move to another room. "The other kids bothering you again?" I asked. I took hold of her hand and began walking her back to the elevator.
"Matt, please, don't make me go back up there. I don't like the new nurse."
I stopped walking. What? I said, kneeling to Nina's level.
She keeps asking us the same question over and over. I said no so many times. I keep telling her no, but everyone else kept laughing with her and saying yes to her. Please, I don't want to go back up.
Nina's words immediately played flashbacks inside my tired, overworked mind. Something about a strange woman going around and asking even stranger questions. I didn't pay enough attention to that broadcast to notice the woman, but even if I had, I thought she had left the hospital. I ditched the elevator and ran up a flight of daunting stairs, stomping against each step with all the force I could muster. I probably woke up all those sleeping employees. I was so loud. I opened the door to the children's room and couldn't believe my eyes. I checked each room, each one on each floor. I woke up my co-worker nurse and asked about the children. She couldn't find them either. We looked everywhere and put the hospital on lockdown. We set off all possible alarms and other emergency procedures. We didn't find them. All that was left behind were their clothes.
It happened on a Friday night. When I came home from work, I texted my friends and told them to grab a drink with me, but they didn't feel like doing anything this weekend. I'm 24, and all my friends started working too, so I understand that they wanted to stay at home, be cozy, and just relax. I was home alone at the time, sitting all by myself, and then something just came to my mind. I just wanted to drive somewhere. So I got in the car again and drove for a while. Then I tried to find a spot to park my car to have a smoke. There was an underground parking lot that was placed in a one-way street. It was around 11:30 p.m. Even though it was a big city, there wasn't much activity around this area. After smoking, I walked back to the parking lot through the dark, small streets. But I was getting anxious and thought to myself, what if someone is following me? I'm out here all alone. So I turned up the pace and reached the parking lot. There was nobody at the parking lot, so I was relieved. But at that very moment, someone behind me shouted loudly. I got the chills and the hairs on the back of my head stood up. I slowly turned around, and there was this huge guy in a hoodie. He came to me and started talking. He was talking about how he just came out of prison and that his wife changed the locks on the doors. I noticed that his right hand was in the pocket of his hoodie. I swear I saw the outline of an object in that pocket. I immediately thought it was a knife. Crap, this is not supposed to happen. I'm gonna die in here, I thought to myself. With a quivering voice, I told him very politely that I had to run the graveyard shift at work so that I could leave. And that was when his voice started to change. He angrily said, "No, you have to help me." I reached in my pocket and took out $30. That was the only money I had on me, and I just handed it to him. He took the money, but became angrier and shouted, "Hey, man, is this the only money you've brought?" He took another step and was much closer to me. But what happened next was a miracle. A loud sound came from a door that was shut outside the parking lot. He got distracted and turned his head around, and that is when I rushed to the elevators. It was a separate room which was only accessible to people who parked their cars there, because the door could only be opened with the parking receipt. I got into the elevator safely, but then I heard his loud footsteps behind me. I ran to my car, got in, and started it. I slowly pulled up to the gate, and it opened. Although I could see the guy charging at me when I tried to get out of the parking lot, it was too late for him. I stepped on the gas and drove away as fast as I could, and it only took me 15 minutes because I was using too much gas. To this day, I can't stop thinking about what would have happened if that door outside the parking lot wouldn't have made that loud noise.
My name is Cam. I'm 20 years old and this happened about 10 years ago. I used to live across the street from my friend Eric. One Saturday, my parents were going away for a night, but I didn't want to go. So we all arranged that I would sleep over my friend Eric's house. We ordered pizza. I spent the night playing video games and watched a few movies. I'm not sure what time it was. It was pretty late, probably around 1 in the morning, I think. I was flicking through Eric's PlayStation games when Eric said, "I thought your parents were going away for the night." I said, "Yeah, they are." "But there's someone in the house," Eric said. Confused, I got up and looked out the window where Eric was looking. and there was a light on, and someone was walking around in one of the rooms. Eric asked me who that could be. I told him I had no idea. My parents were out of town for the night, and we never had anyone come over by our house unannounced, especially at this time of night. Instead of waking Eric's parents or trying to call the police, we came up with this idea to sneak out and investigate who was in my house. Looking back, this was the dumbest thing I ever did, but we were just young boys. We grabbed a couple of flashlights, snuck out of Eric's back door, and headed over to my house. We didn't even think of how we would get in, but we didn't need to because the front door had been forced open. Upon entering the house, we saw there were damp, muddy footprints leading upstairs. I'm not sure if whoever was inside heard us, but we started following the footprints, and one of the lights turned off. At this point, I was getting afraid, and I told Eric we should just leave and tell someone. Eric proceeded upstairs, however. I didn't follow him up. I kept whispering to him, "Eric, come, let's go." He ignored me and continued going up. He walked into one of the rooms, and I lost sight of him. I then bravely went upstairs to see where he went. I walked into my bedroom, and a foul odor hit me in the face. I kept whispering Eric's name, but he wouldn't answer. Then I heard something. It sounded like sobbing. I was scanning the room with my flashlight. In one of the corners of the room, I could see Eric's shoes. I raised the flashlight and I saw a disgusting, dirty hand that was covered in cuts and dirt covering Eric's mouth. The next thing I saw would haunt me for the rest of my life. I raised the flashlight once more, and the person covering Eric's mouth was a man who had a massive grin on his face, a vile beard and long, straight, black and gray, greasy hair. The way he was staring at me traumatized me. His eyes were wide and filled with rage. I screamed as loud as I could and ran out the bedroom. The man proceeded to chase me down the stairs and out the house. I thought I was going to die. Thankfully, when he ran outside, there was a police car pulling into the driveway. Someone had phoned the police when they saw flashlights and someone wandering around the house. The man saw the police and ran off. As he ran, there were things dropping out of his pocket, screwdrivers, a few other small tools, and one object that fell out. However, it wasn't a tool. It was a long, rusty, dirty blade. Thankfully, the man was found and arrested. Eric was unharmed, and so was I. The scary thing was the man didn't seem to have taken anything. So that suggests his interests were much, much more sinister. Eric and I remain best friends, but he nor I will ever forget this terrifying experience.
I'm a 16-year-old girl, and this took place in July of 2019. Me, my parents, and two sisters were having a family gathering at this lake where we all used to go. We hadn't been to this lake in a few years, so I was excited to be going back. Just to give you a general idea of the place, when you first pull into the path to head up to the lake, you have to drive for a few minutes, a very narrow path surrounded by woods. And you come to a fork in the path. One leads to a picnic area and the other leads to the lake. Then you continue up the path to the lake, and after a few more minutes, come across another fork. One side leads to one entrance to the lake, and the other side leads to another entrance that's across the lake. After that, you still have to drive for a few more minutes until you get to the parking area, so it's pretty tedious. We'd already been to the lake for a few hours, and suddenly I got a headache. My mom gave me the car keys so I could go sit in the car with the air conditioning on. I took the keys and started to walk back to the car. The parking lot and the lake area were a little way off apart from each other. As I was approaching our car, I saw a man who was looking through the car windows. He was a skinny, old white man with shoulder-length gray hair, and he wore old clothes. I stopped walking and asked him, "Sir, what are you doing?" He slowly turned to me, stared at me for a moment, and then walked away. I thought it was weird, but I just ignored him that he might be just another visitor in this area. And I was totally wrong. I got into the driver's seat and locked the car. I turned the car on and tried to call my mom to tell her about the man, ask if she could send someone to come sit with me. But there wasn't any cell service out at this lake, so the call never went through. I then looked to the right and saw the old man looking at me through the passenger's side window. He was trying to open the door. I screamed and desperately tried calling my dad and then my aunt, hoping the call would somehow go through, but of course, it didn't. I was freaking out at this point, and I honked the horn at the man, hoping that someone would hear and come see. I was blaring the horn, but there was no one else in the parking area. I was too far away from the lake area, so my family couldn't hear me at all. The man stopped, stared at me, and gave up trying to open the door. And then he stepped back from the car while saying something, but I couldn't hear him. As he disappeared, I got out of the car, locked it, and rushed back to the lake area. When I got there, I slammed the keys on the table and my mom asked me what was wrong. I told her, and as I was talking, I could see that she got angry. She looked at my dad and uncles and told them they needed to come with us back to the car. I started crying and shaking as we were walking back towards the cars. 2 of my uncles ran into the woods and my father drove down to the path. As I was crying, I just stood there. My 2 aunts and grandmother hugged me and told me that everything is okay. Mom looked in the windows of the other cars in the area to see if the man got inside one of the cars, but all the cars were empty. A few minutes later, everyone was back, but they couldn't find that old man. Soon we left the lake, and as we were leaving, we saw a park ranger. We told him everything, and he looked confused. He said that no one didn't go out from this area before us, which meant that man came from the woods in this lake. When I heard of it, I was terrified, but now I am glad that I'm okay. But I still think about what could have happened to me if the man managed to get inside the car. I'm 17 now, but this happened when I was 13 years old. My mom couldn't pay for the household on her own since my parents divorced. So she rented one room, and I used to share a room with my mom. I had one older brother, and he was staying with his dad. And that night, I had to sleep around 9 p.m. because I had school the next day. I shared a bed with my mom. She slept on the other side while I slept close to the wall. For most of the nights, I always fell asleep pretty fast and well, but sometimes I had dreams or nightmares since I was little. However, this nightmare was different than any other nightmare I've ever had. I was walking in a room, and I saw an older man standing near the closet. I tried to speak, but when I opened my mouth, nothing came out. I had no choice, so I walked to him. And when I got closer to the man, he suddenly collapsed on the floor, clutching his chest. His eyes were so wide, almost bulged out, and his mouth was also wide open. He looked like he was gasping for air. His body was trembling terribly. I couldn't get much closer to him anymore because I was too scared to see it. His skin color became paler and paler, like his warm color was being sucked away. I only froze and felt my own heartbeat faster than ever before. I felt like my chest was about to burst open in any second. The man was gazing at me, and soon the pupils of his eyes went up slowly. That was the most horrible moment in my life. Then suddenly, I could let my voice out, and when I got up by myself, I saw my mom's worrying face looking at me. I could only let out a sob. I thought everything was fine. Nothing could be more serious than this. But I freaked out when my mom finished the conversation that she had on the phone. Once she ended the call, she told me it was my older brother and that Dad just died from a heart attack. I couldn't believe what my mom was saying. I immediately told my mom about my nightmare. She only stared at me in pure shock, and we both didn't say anything while we hugged each other. That day, the only thing I could do was pray for him to rest in peace.